Hi, my name is Joanna Gulley, and today I'll be telling you all about the space race, which was a time responsible for mind-blowing feats of space exploration and the cultivation of rocket technology. But before we discuss these accomplishments, it's important to have a background knowledge of the race's competitors and the origin of the technology which sparked the competition. The beginning of the space race is marked by the Soviet Union's successful launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957, but the race's origin can be traced back to the 1940s. The V-2 rocket was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile and was invented during World War II in Nazi Germany, specifically by Wernher von Braun. The V-2 rocket contained a prize automatic guiding system which could transport nuclear bombs without the need for manned crafts, which were extremely dangerous to operate. This technology was greatly sought after by other countries, so, at the war's end, both of the world's newly emerged superpowers, America and the Soviet Union, raced to get their hands on it. The USSR quickly grabbed the V-2 factory and test range, while America was able to snag Wernher von Braun, the brains behind the missile. Now, two immensely powerful nations had the means to create a full-scale nuclear war, which undoubtedly caused tensions to rise between them. Both wanted to show their superiority, and how they did so leads us into my next topic, the Cold War. Because of the Soviet Union's use of totalitarian communism and America's use of democracy, the two countries were already at odds, and it started what would be known as the Cold War. The possession of ballistic missile technology by both sides heightened this opposition, since both countries could easily destroy each other at the press of a button. Eventually, both sides recognized the potential of using von Braun's technology for space exploration and began to cultivate it for that purpose. Although both countries still possessed weapons capable of creating a full-scale nuclear war, good advancements began to come of the V-2 rocket. Space was uncharted territory, and both nations wanted to be the one to dominate it. So the space race began. Before anyone could be sent into space, we needed to know more about how space worked and what limitations there were to space travel. Both nations tested this and gained information by sending up artificial satellites aboard rockets to orbit around Earth and collect data on what lied beyond Earth's atmosphere while doing so. On July 29, 1956, the United States announced that they planned to send an artificial satellite into space. 2 days after, on July 31st, the Soviet Union announced that they planned to do the same. So, the race to be first began, and on October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union satellite Sputnik 1 became the world's first successfully launched artificial satellite. America hastily finished their own satellite and attempted to launch on December 6, 1957. The Vanguard TV-3 would have been a great achievement for America if it had made it further than 4 feet off the launch pad before crashing and exploding into the launch pad. The launch was a spectacular failure for the United States and only set them further behind the Soviet Union in the race. Before America could even get one satellite into orbit, the Soviet Union was able to successfully send up a second, Sputnik 2. The Soviet Union had a different intention with this second satellite than its first endeavor, to carry a living passenger into orbit. After a lot of searching and subject compatibility testing, Laika, a stray husky Spitz found on the streets of Moscow, was chosen to be Sputnik 2's cargo. On November 3, 1957, along with a life support system that could sustain her for 7 days, she was launched into orbit. There were no means of recovery for Laika, and she was expected to die along with her oxygen supply, which would have been a quick and minimally painful death if that had been how Laika met her demise. Due to the loss of the heat shield during takeoff, her small compartment became too hot for her to bear, and she passed an estimated 2 hours after launch from heat exhaustion and stress. Sputnik 2 continued to orbit for 5 months despite the passing of a singular passenger before burning up upon re-entry. With no successful launch attempts yet under their belt, America was falling severely behind the Soviet Union in the space race. But in 1958, the race's conclusion started to become less clear. On January 31st, 1958, America finally successfully launched their first artificial satellite, Explorer 1. Explorer 1 supplied the United States with useful scientific data that allowed them to start closing the gap between them and their opponent. The satellite was equipped with a cosmic ray detector and revealed the existence of later dubbed Van Allen rays, which are belts of charged particles that are gathered in place due to Earth's magnetic field. Under the right solar conditions, Van Allen rays can wane in a way that exposes satellites to dangerous levels of radiation. This discovery greatly impacted future launches as they have to be scheduled and navigated in a way that exposes a rocket's passengers to the least amount of radiation possible. With successful launches now behind both competitors, they had their sights set on the Earth's natural satellite, the Moon, and specifically landing on it. On January 2, 1959, the Soviet Union launched Luna 1 with the intention of being the first unmanned craft to come in contact with a celestial body. The craft made it out of Earth's atmosphere successfully, but sailed past the Moon instead of landing on it, which was the mission's purpose. Even still, Luna 1 wasn't a complete flop, as it eventually became the first earthen satellite to orbit around the Sun. America constructed their own spacecraft with a similar intention, and in March of 1958, Pioneer 4 was successfully launched. Pioneer 4's fate was similar to that of Luna 1, as it too missed the Moon and eventually went into solar orbit. The race to be the first on the Moon continued, and the Soviet Union's Luna 2 was launched on September 12, 1959, and fulfilled the purpose of the Luna missions and successfully reached the Moon's surface. It was the first object of Earthen origin to make contact with another celestial body. The Luna missions resulted in many pictures of the Moon and its surface, which were useful to scientists at the time. Now, we definitely have better photos of the Moon and both of its sides, but the images taken by the Luna crafts were revolutionary at the time of their capture. Even amidst all these feats of space exploration, the Cold War continued to rage on, and almost became hot in October 1962, when an American U-2 spy plane identified a Soviet ballistic missile being assembled for installation only 90 miles away from Florida's coast in Cuba. Similar bases were constructed by America in the case that retaliation was needed. 2 weeks after the initial threat, both nations withdrew their weapons, but it will never be forgotten how close the Cold War was to migrating from just a nuclear showdown to a nuclear annihilation. Even still, America continued to cultivate its rocket technology with the intention of sending human beings to the Moon. The Apollo program began in 1963 and was started with just that intention in mind. Furthermore, Apollo missions 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 all successfully achieved this goal. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong set foot on the Moon, making himself the first man ever to do so in human history. This feat finally pushed America ahead of the Soviet Union in the race, as the USSR's own lunar mission, N1, failed to launch. Even with the success of Apollo 11, the Apollo program wasn't completely triumphant. On January 27, 1967, Apollo 1, the first manned mission of the Apollo program, was unsuccessful due to a flash fire that swept through the command module of the craft. This resulted in the tragic deaths of the 3 astronauts on board: Roger Chaffee, Ed White, and Gus Grissom. Fortunately, no other Apollo missions resulted in the loss of life, and the successful missions brought back a multitude of scientific data which is still being studied to this day. The conclusion of the Apollo program brings us closer to the conclusion of this presentation. Now I'm going to talk about what ended the space race. In July of 1975, America and the Soviet Union temporarily put their differences aside and worked together on their first ever joint space venture, the Apollo-Soyuz mission. This mission marked the final flight of the Apollo program and was the first ever space flight in which crafts containing humans of different nationalities docked in space. The Apollo-Soyuz mission encouraged future collaborations and multinational expeditions, and without it, endeavors such as the International Space Station would likely have never occurred. The Apollo-Soyuz mission officially ended the space race, but advancements in space exploration didn't stop there. Since the space race's conclusion, feats such as NASA's Space Shuttle program, the Mars rover, and the Kepler Space Telescope have occurred, and we're still learning more about space outside of both our solar system and our galaxy. We're living in a time where previously impossible ideas are becoming possible, but we didn't get there without a cost. The space race was a part of what could have been the most devastating war for both America and the Soviet Union in history. The space race set the stage for the technology we use today, and it's likely we wouldn't have the amount of information we do if it hadn't occurred. But do these triumphs compensate for the fear both America and Soviet civilians experienced during the Cold War? We'll never know the answer to that question, and as of yet, there's no technology that can be used to see what it would be like if things had happened differently. All we can really do is continue to marvel at the accomplishments of the space race and push on in the exploration of space. This concludes my presentation. Goodbye.